Welcome to the Really From podcast, where we talk about culture, creativity, and breaking down that question, where are you really from? Welcome to another episode of the Really From podcast. My name is Chris Lee Rodriguez. I play in the band Really From. We just released our self-titled record, and this is a podcast where we're talking about themes and music related to our album. And today I'm talking with Jeremy Hunter. They are most known for Skatune Network, their solo project JER, and We Are the Union. I met Jeremy almost 5 years ago now at this point, in 2016. And I didn't know about I knew them as a person. They're really dope and really kind and just really fun to be around. But I didn't really learn about their artistry and just musical prowess until after the fact. Probably one of the most talented multi-instrumentalists that I know personally, and just an all-around awesome person and a very funny person to hang out with too. So thank you so much, Jeremy, for making it.
Yeah, thanks for having me on this thing.
Awesome. So today we're gonna talk about our song Quirk, and specifically the topic of what we inherit from our family, which is a huge theme from that song. So Jeremy, I wanted to start off with this question and pose to you of what's a trait you believe you inherited from your parents or other family members?
Definitely feel like a trait that I have inherited would be like trying to think of how to word this. I guess like a trait of not communicating, like I feel like that's a thing that especially like the Black experience being like it's a lot of mix of, I mean, I could talk all day about this, but it's like a lot of mix of how like, like Black folk don't really process emotions. And I feel like a lot of that has to do with like, like back during slavery, like, they weren't treated like people. A lot of masculinity that is pushed through white supremacy keeps like, like men from processing their emotions in general. And just like such a big, I feel like there's like a huge big mix of like why that's like such a thing. Like my parents aren't like the most to communicate about stuff. And it's definitely something we've worked on as a family and something I've worked on as myself, especially being in like the DIY, like punk scene, where I feel like people are much more down. Sometimes punk sucks, but a lot of the times people are much more down to like wanna talk about things and communicate better and not just like, whatever. But I've noticed that's like a big, especially as of lately, I've noticed it's like a huge thing. And again, like I said, I think part of that, it does come from like the Black experience and like a lot of that, especially like for my parents, like the boomer generation, that whole generation of Black folk and everything with like they went through. I feel like a lot of that is like some reason it's just a lack of communication for sure is a big thing I feel like I've inherited and I'm always working on.
Yeah, I think is your family religious at all, or we're pretty like Southern
they're more
Christian,
like,
or like kind of more like
definitely
laid back?
Yeah, more like Christian for sure. They're definitely not like they don't like, my parents kind of like see that there is also a lot of like white supremacy in religion, in the way like, like religion, how like it is written in text versus how like white supremacy has manipulated it, are two separate things. And so my parents are not very like, and like they don't go to church as much, but like they do practice like, like religion itself, if that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure, especially in the American context. I feel like Christianity in the States is so different than everywhere else.
So different. Yeah.
Like my I grew up Catholic, but like Puerto Rican Catholic. So I feel like there's just a lot more mysticism, and
yes,
it's very different, and there's a lot more practice. You know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah, people in America just like to do the talk, but they also like
don't do
like
it.
he was without sin cast the first stone. Y'all are sinning. Why are you casting stones at other people? Like
Exactly. And
just
it's
things
not
like
like
that.
they're not even doing anything to show that they practice. It's just a lot of meeting in a room and just talking about Jesus,
Yeah,
rather than
it's
like
definitely like
giving up
also a
Lent.
way to just justify like their shittiness too for a
Yeah.
lot of people. Some people like I know a lot of people have like the faith and they still do shitty things, but a lot of people literally just use it as a means to like justify traditional like it's because it's
Yeah.
tradition, you're religious because you're religious and you don't like question why. And I don't think it's a problem being religious. I definitely think it's a problem when you don't question like why you're doing things or like you are committing to something you don't even understand.
Yeah. Like interrogating the reason
Mm-hmm.
and really understand it. That's very true. Uh yeah, I feel communication, I think, is very, I feel like that's very common. Funny and mention that too. Because I feel like that it also depends on where you are as well. Because there's like, I don't. You grew up in Florida, right? Or are you from the South
Yeah.
originally? All
Yeah.
right, okay.
Yep. From South Florida, like near Miami.
Near Miami. Okay, okay. So I grew up like right outside New York, and I feel like there's a lot of similarities between like the Miami experience and like the New York, but also a lot of
Mm-hmm.
differences. It's just like it is turned up to 11, and everything's just like people just like say what's on their mind. They just like
Mm-hmm.
say shit, and they're like, "Oh, I'm gonna say this," and like that's how they communicate. But they're just like yelling and like chaos, and so interesting. They mentioned that it's like it's hard to communicate through or really communicate in your family, because I feel like the issue is not so much communicating or speaking what you're trying to say. The issue is listening and hearing each other.
Yes. Yes.
You
A
know what I
lot of
mean?
processing of that stuff. Yeah. Or just
Um,
getting to that weird, because like at some point, whenever you're addressing an issue, especially in between people, there's always gonna be like that awkwardness until you become really good at communicating. There's an awkwardness of bringing up, uncomfortable topics. And I feel like that's like the hardest part is I
yeah,
feel like is on any end, not just like from me or not just from my parents, but just in general. And this goes to relationships outside of family, like with friends and things like
yeah.
that as well.
That's actually a great segue. Talking about awkwardness, because one of the themes I try to discuss um, with Quirk was talking about intergenerational trauma and really understanding how these traumatic experiences that your parents or your ancestors or people in your lineage experience is passed down almost genetically, almost as code or data.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like we don't really understand that awkwardness without before processing what it means to inherit the experiences of the people who came before us. So I was wondering, um, if you experience something like that, if you feel like you experienced intergenerational trauma, and how would you define it, or how would you categorize that in your own context?
Yeah, I mean, definitely have experienced intergenerational trauma. I think part of that is like systemically, there's things that are causing trauma, especially amongst marginalized groups. That like the condition of race has not gotten much better in America. There's a facade that it has, but at the end of the day, they just switched out slavery for prisons, which is still slavery, and they're still redlining, they're still gerrymandering, they're still doing all the things to suppress votes and keep Black folk out of power. So like, um, in general, like I feel like there's systems like that are still causing types of trauma. But not only that, so some of the trauma is so like hard and so deep that it's like ingrained in a lot of people's lives, sometimes forever, if they don't work on it. And like it's really hard to uproot trauma and like confront trauma. I feel like that could be another thing that ties into the whole like uh communication is hard deal, because it's hard to talk about these things, and that's kind of how I see generational trauma manifesting itself. Like at the end of the day, like my parents and like people in general who are like raising children, they're doing their best, and it's really hard to do your best when society's designed against you. And I just think it's very I just think it's very much like sometimes the best isn't what's best for, like your children, but like it's hard to, navigate the world, especially as it's changing and as like this country purposely makes it harder for people of color and black and brown folk to do exist. That's the thing I was looking for, to exist.
Yeah.
And so like I feel like that's where that trauma comes from. Like it's traumatic to like not know how you're gonna pay your next bill. It's traumatic to think of like, the idea of your children starving. It's like traumatic to deal with like, like even with overt racism stuff. Like I was like running the other day, like a few months ago. And the other day a few months ago. I was running the other day a few months ago. And it was like October, September maybe, and I was like just in my neighborhood, and like this white truck with the all white lives matter thing was like, yelling at like black folk. It's like a black neighborhood. And that shit, like at the time I was just like, okay, I'm just gonna like go home, and like I'm not gonna say I wasn't scared what during that time, but I look back and I'm like, yeah, that's like a traumatic experience. Like, and that's,
Yeah.
that's like just stuff that like I've dealt with throughout my life and I've never thought too much about. But I think it's kind of fucked up that like I've dealt with that and not thought too much about it, like
Yeah,
enough in my
it's
life to.
that's like such a good point, because I feel like, or not a reason, but a lot reason why you're talking, how what you just said, that you're not thinking about it, is almost a survival mechanism. You know what I'm
Mm-hmm.
saying? Like you don't have time to think about it. um you don't have time to think about like systemic oppression, or just structures that are not designed for certain people to thrive, because you can't even get to the level of thriving without surviving, right? So
Yeah.
I think about that. I wanted to ask you that because I know with my family, maybe my mom or my dad, and like my parents are divorced, so that they have like different perspectives. But I know, like with being Puerto Rican, I was thinking about this the other day, how being Puerto Rican, you don't really have a nationality because it's co-opted
Uh-huh.
by American, the colonial state. Um,
Yeah.
but I'm just thinking about, does your parents or your family kind of recognize that these systems, or are they just trying to go through it? Because I remember, um, like it thinks makes me think about the what's his name, David Foster Wallace speech about the fish swimming, and he's just like, this is water, or like a fish that wants
Mm-hmm.
to be in the ocean, but he just realizes water, this is your everyday life. And
Mm-hmm.
I was talking to my grandmother once of how in Puerto Rico they don't say bus when they say like bus, they call buses guagua. And
Uh-huh.
I think if there's I'm not like a linguistic person or anything, but I feel like there is indigenous reasons for why Puerto Ricans say words a certain way. And I asked my
Yeah.
grandmother that, I was like, why do we call it guagua? It's like, porque es un guagua, yo no sé. And just like, that is just what she always called it, because that was water for her. So I was wondering
Mm-hmm.
if your family or parents had that experience, or they kind of are recognizing these states as well. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, well, they definitely like my parents definitely recognize that, America's like not, as a racist like
Yeah.
country. They definitely recognize that, and they know that's like they're very. I'm very glad on that. Like, it's like there are things to argue about at Thanksgiving, but we're on the same page when we say America is evil. Like it's like things like that. It's like other things to argue about, but yeah, they are definitely like on that wavelength, and like they definitely understand, and this is something that they've grown to understand too, which is something I'm very grateful and appreciative of, having parents who like, I feel like a lot of people have parents who are very like in their ways, and my parents at least like have the room for like they listen and they like grow and we talk about things. So that's like a good trait, and thing that I've noticed. Um but yeah, I definitely feel like that's something that they what's it called? I lost my train of thought.
No, I know, but they acknowledge or
Yeah.
recognize things. Yeah. Um, I wanted to ask you something earlier. You mentioned about like uh your your experiences with your family, and just like dealing with these like traumatic events
Hmm.
in your like in your past, or in your family's past, affects your own relationships with other people as well. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about that.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that? It cut out a little
Like,
bit.
sorry, if I was wondering, you mentioned earlier about how your relationship with your parents and seeing how that affects your relationships with other people, with your friends and
Hmm.
communities. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about how you feel that uh just that experience and that lineage that you have kind of almost informs or shapes your relationships with other people outside of your family unit.
Yes, well, I mean, like, okay, so I'm definitely, and this is something I talk with my partner with about. My partner like works, has done a lot of movement work and worked for like abolition groups, most specifically like Black-led abolition groups. So like this is always a topic we're always involved with or talking about. But my generation and my sister's like the millennials, really, the millennial generation is the first generation where you had this many Black folk growing up in predominantly white areas. You know, like my parents, my mom and dad were born in 57 and 58. So they're
Mm.
boomers. They're very young boomers, like the youngest boomers. After that, it's Gen X, but they're boomers at the end of the day. And like they, like my mom was like went to a first integrated high school. In high school, like in 11th grade, she went out. She was in segregated schools up until then. So like that wasn't that long ago, and people act like it is, but really it's like my parents lived through segregation up until they were about to get out of high school in like the late 60s,
And they're from
early
Florida?
or like late 70s, excuse me. Yes, they're from Florida, Miami. So
Okay.
yeah, integration like hit last. Like in Miami,
Yeah.
Miami was holding on. Most of the South was, but like Florida's so far down there, and it was such a movement, and especially with like bigger cities, like integration didn't happen like in 65 or 66 when the Civil Rights Act was like being put into place. That it was hitting like in the mid 70s down in Miami. And so I feel like because we're the first generations who are growing up in like these neighborhoods, I'm starting to see like even at a young age, I was seeing like a huge differences in like my experience versus other people's experiences. And that's kind of when I first started to realize like, oh, like, there's a discrepancy here. I remember one time I got a project to do a family tree, and my teacher was white. I was the only Black kid in the class, and I told them like
Mm.
I don't have access to my like family history beyond my grandparents. And
Mm.
my teacher, like, I was in fourth grade. My teacher got mad at me. It was like, and they were like, just go ask your parents. And so my mom had to like go into the school and like yell at my teacher over that. And I feel like that was like my first experience, my little fourth grade, like what, 9-year-old self or whatever, was first for the first time experiencing like, oh, so this is like, my experience is different from everybody else's because that's like, in my mind, my whole life, I was like, yeah, I don't know my like grandparents like that or my family history. But in society's mind, that's not necessarily the case. So I feel like sometimes because people don't understand, you know, like that in general, like what it's like to grow up not knowing these things or grow up with like this different experience, it's harder to sometimes communicate or relay these your experience to other people. And that's like the biggest challenge in my opinion, because when you're at the place of privilege, like you're always used to everyone meeting you where you're at, and it's really hard to like to be disadvantaged, not in that point of privilege, and trying to convey certain things like, hey, this makes me uncomfortable because of X, Y, and Z, or like,
Yeah.
this is a problem because of X, Y, and Z. Like, it's really hard sometimes. And that's something I've noticed throughout the years.
Yeah. Have you seen Steve McQueen's Small Axe anthology?
No, I haven't.
Yo, you gotta watch it. There's so it's like these 5 films that he made. That's all on Amazon Prime. But each
Okay.
film, it's set in the context of London, Notting Hill, from like
Uh
late
huh.
60s to mid 80s, and it's
Okay.
about just like the black communities in London, and they're mostly like Trinidadian, Jamaican, Caribbean
Right.
communities. So one, there's a lot of like early ska and early reggae. There's one
Hell yeah.
episode which is just like a house party, and they're just playing. It's called a blues, and it's basically just like dub and dance hall, and it's
I
like
love that.
it's just all like the thesis of it is just black joy. um but there was one episode or one movie, I guess, where it's about this real person who became a young adult author, and he was thrown in prison for a protest, organizing protests, and he was
Mm-hmm.
talking to this like older Jamaican Rastafarian guy, and the Rastafarian guy told him that you need to read, educate yourself, because you can't know the future. You can't move into the future if you do not know your past. And the first
Mm-hmm.
book he gave him was this historical book. Oh, I forgot. Oh, Black Jacobins. It's about the Haitian Revolution
Oh
back in like
yeah.
the 1700s. Yeah. So he gave him this book and like really stressed the importance of like knowing your legacy. And I think it's really interesting seeing that juxtaposed to like the American experience, where like black communities in UK, a majority are immigrants because they came from the Caribbean, so
Yeah.
there's already like somewhat of an ethnic identity established. But here, it's like the ethnic identity is in an American context in a country that is like belligerently violent and hostile
Yeah.
to those
Well, like
communities.
another hard part about, and this is a big problem with identity, especially specifically with Black folk in America, is there's no other ethnic group, race, whatever you want to call it, in the world who like really doesn't have any idea where they came from, and that's like a
Yeah,
huge thing with like because of slavery. It's like at the end of the day, like there's like hundreds of millions. I don't know about hundreds of millions, but definitely tens of millions of Black folk in America who are descendants of slavery. And because of that, they have no records of where they came from. Like even like indigenous people, like obviously, what happened with the indigenous people is very sad. But at the end of the day, if you know at least where your indigenous like blood comes from, you can like look up your culture and your history. But you can't even do that with like Black folk. Like you can say, yeah, I'm from Africa, but that's like saying I'm from Asia. Asia could mean
yeah,
Chinese, Japanese, Russian, like Iranian. Like there's so many
yeah,
different things that constitute as Asian. Like people from Iraq and from Pakistan, like that's technically Asian. So like, it's the same thing. It's like, oh, I'm African. What does that mean? You could be like Algerian. You could be Muslim. You could be
yeah,
from like the Zulu Nation. Like or
yeah.
whatever. So like obviously there's so much that is what's it called that constitutes race in general and like being where you're from. And like Black folk in America don't have that. I'm paired on top of the fact that this country throughout all of history has been anti-Black and continues to be anti-Black and like
Yeah.
directly harms Black folk and communities.
Yeah. And it's hard too. It's just to, like you said earlier, just to exist, and just you can't just like sit. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
You can't just like
Yeah.
you can't just sit and be, because there's so much that's
Yeah.
always going on in your mind, and just like I feel like privilege could be defined of the ability to just sit and be.
Yeah.
Just without all the other the noise that's kind of surrounds you, especially with it in historical context like that too. And sorry. Um, and I think the last question I wanted to ask is, do you feel like at all? I know because you've been releasing these singles and have been like kind of been making a point of saying something with your songs, and I feel
Mm-hmm.
like it aligns with the new tone movement that's going on right now, like Bad Operation and all these
Mm-hmm.
bands. That it's very about social consciousness and activism, and just trying to celebrate radical joy. So I was wondering, do you feel like this topic of inheriting this trauma from our lineage or from your ancestry affects your work as an artist or a musician at all?
Oh, 100% it does. I think it affects a lot of your experience in general of like understanding these things, like we are all victims to this system that we're in. And that doesn't matter who you are. Like at the end of the day, um, America thrives via capitalism and capitalism thrives via exploitation. There is a class struggle and a race struggle. Both of those are very important. Almost everybody who suffers from the race struggle also suffers from the class struggle, but not everyone who suffers from the class struggle suffers from the race struggle. And there's so many layers of understanding that all of our struggles are intertwined. And until we understand that, we're going to keep struggling. And there's just so much to learn and work with there. And I think as an artist, like moving forward, especially with like ska music being a music that historically back in like the two-tone movement was rooted in like, unity, and like throughout the years has been pushed like, yeah, ska's about unity and about not being racist, and like, that's like a good message to have like in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. But now we're understanding that racism is a systemic thing. So you can't just be like, yeah, let's not be racist. Like you need to be like, no, yeah, let's dismantle racism. Like it needs to be actively dismantled, and it needs to, like, it's a system that needs to be brought down, and it's a lot of work. So part of the music that I'm making is acknowledging that history of the genre. Not everything about JER is necessarily like political, obviously.
Right, right.
Like, I have like songs that are very like personal and stuff like that, but it's like I don't have the privilege to not be political, like people are always like, why are you making ska political? And it's like, so well, one, ska has always been political, you're just bad at listening. Two, it's like I don't have the privilege to just be like, I don't feel like being political today. Like I can't go out to the store and have people like clench their purses and have cops follow me around and have like security ask me why I'm in their store as if I'm not shopping, because that happens to me, more than I'd want to admit. But it's like I don't have the privilege to just be like, you know what? Nah, today I'm not going to be profiled. Like
Yeah.
I don't have that. I don't have I don't have that privilege. So it's like
It's so
if I don't have
interesting.
that privilege, then it's like if I don't have the privilege to not exist like that, then you don't have the privilege to like hear my music without that. So that's kind of
Yeah.
how I see it. And it's like if you don't want to hear that, then like use your privilege and do not listen to me. I really don't care for your support anyway.
Yeah. I feel like it's so interesting when people try to differentiate between like a political and personal perspective when they are
Mm-hmm.
really intertwined. And I feel like that's how I always approach writing about anything that is that's the thematic or like a political context, is that the reason why things are political is because they made it personal, just historically speaking.
Yes.
It's not like this abstract concept. It's like your everyday life. Like the fact that we're talking over the internet is regulated by political decisions or government decisions, or the fact that you're able to purchase this music or able to afford subscriptions is because of economic systems that
Yeah.
affect your everyday life. And I feel like that delineation is kind of a misstep where,
Mm-hmm.
and I think it's so interesting that even your songs that are personal, that does not negate the I don't know. I feel like it doesn't negate just how impactful it is as like a political statement. Just again, what I was
Yeah.
saying earlier, the right to exist and just to be a person is nearby impossible sometimes. So to
Yes.
spread stories about that is you are making a political choice by trying to
Mm-hmm.
share your joy of your own everyday life.
Yeah, and I mean, like at the end of the day, politics. Like, I feel like people think politics is like a cute thing. That's like, what's your favorite color? Are you Democrat or Republican? Like, I feel like
Yeah.
people think like that, and it's like, no, like politics affect how we exist in this world and like our experiences. Like the last single I released, "Message to My Future Self." It's a very personal song. It's about growing up and not knowing what to do in life, and having this fear that nothing's going to work out. But at the end of the day, like you look back over the past few years and you see how like things did work out. So like it's kind of like be hopeful for the future. But at the end of the day, that song is hella political because the fear
Yeah.
of not knowing about the future comes from a fear of not having stability, because we live in a society that exploits people and allows people to starve.
Yeah.
Like, so it's like that personal song is rooted because of a situation that politics have caused.
Yeah. It's so
Because
funny.
then it's
Go on.
what's up. Oh, I was gonna say, and like literally those politics are because of just to benefit like the few, like the rich, the people who are on top. It's like those politics are not benefiting us, and yet we're out here arguing and defending it. Not us,
That's
like us specifically, but us as in like
yeah.
humans and people in America.
Yeah, that's so funny. You mentioned that because that was like the song that I was like, I didn't like. Obviously, it's like a personal perspective, but I heard that as a political song, or
Uh
I just
huh.
saw like it just felt very well. When you talk about the future, you end up and like approaching a prophetic stance, but not so much
Yeah.
prophetic like where you're preachy, but more so just like the idea of hoping for better, or you like you're saying being cautiously optimistic is a political
Mm-hmm.
stance of, because you don't know what's going to happen. It's almost kind of tying earlier, but talk about religion, about faith, and the reason why the purpose of religion is different than the purpose of faith. And it's like
Yes.
moving forward and trying to survive. That's all what it is just prolonging your life to as long as it can make it, and trying to
Mm-hmm.
support others as well. Yeah, I don't know. Anything else you want to say about that?
No, I think that's pretty much it. I think
Yeah.
I've voiced all my thoughts on this.
Oh, thank you so much also for being here and being part of this. I want to give you opportunity to shout out anything, any projects you're doing, anything you're working on, any other community organizations, or other community or other people that you want to shout out in your life. This will be released in March, so just keep that in mind. Whatever you want to shout out, this will be in a March context.
Yeah, so I'm not sure if this will be announced by March. If it's not, just cut this part out. But if it
Got
is,
it.
you could just leave it in. It'll be kind of funny. But Where the Union has a new record that's dropping, I believe, in April. I'm not super in the loop, but I know we had worked on a new record late last year, and so hopefully it'll be announced. And I don't look like a fool saying all this right now.
We can edit it out. It's fine.
Yeah, but super stoked on that. I'm pretty sure the first single will be out late February or early March. So that's exciting. And then JER, I'm not sure what's going to be. I'm not sure what JER will be like at the time. But my project JER is, we talked about a little bit as my personal project, and also Skatune Network, obviously doing covers. But I'm trying to do some more beyond covers. So I'm always here to put that out there. Also, just want to shout out the whole Bad Time Records family in general. All those bands have given me a lot of hope for the future of ska in general and the future of this genre. Yeah, that's all I can think of right now.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I also want to thank you so much for all the work you've done for ska. I grew up in the Jersey ska scene, and that's like kind of my background. Really From is essentially a secret ska band, even though
I love that so much.
Even if Michi and Sandra don't want to admit it, essentially every song that I write is just a derivative of the ska songs I wrote when I was in high school. So
I love that so much.
So I really appreciate you, and also this is kind of roundabout. Your Skatune Network has helped me stay connected with people that I grew up in the ska scene with that I haven't talked to in a while. I had a friend from high school who lives in Ireland or the UK now, who reached out to me when we did the Steven Universe cover, and she was like, "Oh my god, how do you know this? How do you know Skatune Network?" And I was just like, "Oh yeah, Jeremy's homie." So
that's so much.
Yeah, so I appreciate you. I value you. Thank you so much for doing this. Please,
yeah, of course, thank you.
if you're on YouTube, subscribe to Skatune Network. Listen to JER. Listen to We Are the Union. Check out Bad Time Records. Our album will be out at this point, so please give that a listen. And I'll see y'all then.